Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of FinServ Tech Oracles. I'm John Burke, CTO of Nemertes, here with my oracular colleague, Jerry Murphy, to share our thoughts on technology for financial services firms. And for this episode, Jerry, you wanted to discuss the recent news about Chinese hacks into U.S. telcos, codenamed Salt Typhoon this time around. So
Yep.
let's start exactly what is Salt Typhoon and why should anybody care?
Well, Salt Typhoon is the uh, name given to a group of professional hackers that pretty much everybody agrees is a subsidiary of the Chinese state intelligence service. And they've been around at least since 2020. And the reason you should care is that, the Chinese government and these guys specifically are actively and successfully hacking into some of the largest environments. And in this case, most recently, it was all of the major carriers. And the thing that they hacked into was the system that these carriers use for tracking people's telephone calls. Um, and the scary part is when you go to first, of course, in China says disavows any notion of Salt Typhoon or that is those guys, but they always do that. So I got take that with large grains of salt. Yeah, pun intended, I guess. Um, but and also all these carriers have said that they're basically saying no comment as far as the extent of what's been exposed and what they're doing about it. But the reason you should care is, they're able to basically get into people's telephone calls. Now, you would think that certainly all the stuff in the news is about the fact that they're trying to figure out what the Republicans are saying to each other, although they're certainly going to care what both sides and ultimately what they're looking at is anything that people are trying to say about China specifically. But if you're thinking, oh, I'm a private company, I do financial services, why would they care about me? Well, there are very large companies out there like Bank of America, Citigroup, from BlackRock, which apparently controls $10 trillion in assets. You think they wouldn't be interested in telephone conversations those people are having? I think they might be. So
Yeah, it seems like a real possibility. And so, is there anything FinServ companies can be doing, should be doing to protect themselves in this situation where, the infrastructure itself is potentially compromised?
yeah, well, I mean, first, although there's less impact, but you certainly want to check your telco contracts to see what any of their clauses are for liability. And as a guy who used to basically run a telco service, we are very famous for indemnifying ourselves from any potential harms to you. So I would definitely check whatever your indemnification clauses are and push back on them to the extent you can. What you can more specifically do internally is make sure you're encrypting everything, and that's both at rest. So when you got things that are in your databases, make sure all that stuff's encrypted. And certainly when you're going across the network, make sure you're encrypting all of that traffic, because the probability that somebody's going to be looking at, if it's not China, is it Russia, is it North Korea, for that matter, is it any kind of criminal organization that is trying to track and use these things? So you have to really make sure you're encrypting all that stuff. Also make sure that you're testing your data recovery policies. Most people have policies on recovering data, and most people, what we find is at the end of the year, they check the box in, late November, December. It's like, oh, we got to do a data recovery test. And so they group all these different tests into one thing. Let's check our procedures. Let's test it. We test something that's very specific and they go, ooh, I tested it. That's not sufficient, right? You really have to test, corrupting a database. Can I recover the data? Is the data that I have backed up itself recoverable? Because one of the scary things is when people say they find out about Salt Typhoon. They just found out about it on the 9th of October. And most people figure that's hacks and presents have been going on for months. So if you wait until hearing about an event to checking your data, it's probably too late. You want to assume that there probably have been breaches and govern yourself with the assumption that I do have breaches as opposed to the hope that I don't.
And I'll just throw in, since I get to, because I'm here with a microphone. Since we're looking at a literal man-in-the-middle attack here, consider encryption methods that are robust against man-in-the-middle attacks. End-to-end encryption that is based on symmetric keys as opposed to public keys, so both sides have to know about them in advance, and that those keys are transmitted by a different channel than the data stream that will be encrypted using those keys. Things like that can give you encryption that is secure even in the face of a compromised network that it's traversing.
That's a great point. Yeah.
So, Jerry, what do you recommend?
So what I recommend is sort of three things. One is, run your operation in terms of your processes and procedures as if you are hacked, because the reality is most of us probably are. So don't assume you're not or hope you're not. Just assume you are, and run all your operations as if you're operating in a compromised environment, and then take the actions that are around that, such as making sure all your data is encrypted, making sure you know how to recover data, making sure you have restoral procedures, or even creation from scratch procedures for your data. Make sure that you're testing with your people that they're following the best practices to minimize those exposures, that they're notifying people in the presence of those procedures, and actively test your recovery plans. Having a plan on paper that you pull out once a year is just absolutely not sufficient. That's something you should be doing at least on a quarterly basis.
Okay, great. So your top takeaways this week are: assume that since communications networks can be compromised, they are compromised. Keep your data recovery plans fresh, and test, 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 test.
There you go.
And that's it for us. Until next week at, 12 o'clock, same time,
That's
same
right.
day. Thanks again for watching and listening.
Have a happy Halloween.